Starting to put some of the stuff back on this engine now. I got the thread chaser and cleaned up the threads on these studs that stick out. These are all 8mm studs. This one's a 6mm stud for the oil cooler. And all the nuts were in pretty good shape. I just run those, polished them up a little bit on the wire wheel. Now, none of these had any washers on them or anything. So I went and got some washers and put down underneath this oil. I don't know what they call that, the filter, or anyway, it's an oil filler neck there. Put some washers underneath it, and then I got some lock washers and put on there. The next thing would be to put the distributor on, but I think before I put the distributor on, I'm going to go ahead and check the torque on the head bolts and check the valve lash. Well, one of the things you have to do to check the torque on the head bolts is to take the intake off the heads. And since I've already got the intake off the heads, that's just one step I don't have to do, so I might as well get that done before I put the intake and everything back on there. Now, the manual for the sawmill says to check all that stuff every 3 months if it's under steady operation. The VW book on there says to check it every 3,000 miles whenever you change the oil and stuff, to check the valve lash, the valve gap, check the head bolt tension. Well, I don't know how long this thing ran the last time they ran it, or between the last times they ran it. I don't think it ran very long, but it's been sitting, of course, it's over 3 months since it's been checked, so that goes on the 3-month period. I had a Volkswagen Bug years ago, and I did work on the engine on it, but that's been 40 years ago almost, and I forgot most of what I did on that. So I got to looking through my stuff, and I found a shop manual for it. It's not a perfect manual for it, but it does give me a little bit of idea. The manual for the sawmill has some stuff on it for the engine. It's not totally inclusive, but anyway, between all those we can get all this stuff figured out. I got the oil cooler cleaned up the best that I could. I would have liked to have been able to get down in between those tubes on the oil cooler and clean them up a little better, but it just wasn't practical. Well, anyway, I got it cleaned up and painted. Oh, it's ready to go back on. Well, I think I'll get the distributor on first, and then we'll put the oil cooler on. We'll move from this way, and that way from the back, or that's actually the front of the engine, but we'll move that direction this way. Get that stuff put on there before I put the stuff here on the back of the engine, the starter and the alternator and the governor and all of that stuff. I'm glad I decided to check the torque on those head bolts and adjust those valves. I'd assumed that everything was going to be right because it was supposed to be low time engine put together and stuff. But those head bolts, the torque on them was not right. The upper bolts, the outside ones, was just about right on, but the inner ones they were way loose. I think what happened, there's a diagram in the manual on how to torque those head bolts down, and it shows two pictures, and the first one is to torque them down to 7 pounds, and the next one is to torque them down to 18 pounds. And I think whoever looked at it thought that maybe the inside ones were supposed to be torqued to 7 pounds and the outside ones torqued to 18. Anyway, that's what I assume, but I've got those torqued down to the proper torque now, and I was adjusting the valves, and of course they were quite a bit off. The Volkswagen book that I got, it got all kinds of different settings on it, anywhere from 6 to 13 thousandths. But the manual for the sawmill says to set them at 8 thousandths. And the idea is you want to set them slightly loose so that the valves close all the way, because they transfer the heat from the valves to the head through the contact with the valve seat. And if they don't close all the way, then the engine's not going to cool properly. And of course, as it runs, as it starts up, everything expands in there. The valves grow and stuff, so that the lash, the gap in them, is going to shorten up as it warms up and gets hot. But anyway, they were all way off, but I got to noticing that those studs, the adjusting studs, are all wore out. Well, I was trying to get them adjusted, and they got a lip on one side of them, and anyway, they're all wore out, so I'm going to have to see if I can get new studs for that before I put it back together. Well, anyway, I'm glad I found that. We can get some other things done on it meantime. I can't finish this and get it running until I get those adjustment screws for the valves, but I can go ahead and finish putting it all together. Getting it assembled now. Got the governor on there, and the alternator, and the starter, and the governor, this throttle control is all hooked up. Oil cooler's on there. That's nice and pretty and shiny now. Of course, I got the distributor That's the fuel pump. I didn't do anything with the fuel pump except clean the grease out of it, re-grease it, and put new gaskets on it. And then oil filter, whatever they call it. I need to make a gasket for that cap. Now I just put the intake tube on there, the manifold. It took a little while longer than it should have because one of the nuts, the hold down nuts that hold the flange here down onto the head came up missing. Oh, I had to go to town and get one. And then I got some 8 grade 1/4 inch bolts to hold that pulley onto the ring gear. So it looks a little better than it did. Now this is a Volkswagen engine, but it's got a few modifications to it. Of course, this is the end that would normally bolt up to the transaxle, and this would be the end that would be out on the outside or the rear of the Volkswagen of a Bug. And then you'd have a fan here that would blow air over the engine and then transaxle. So this one's quite a bit different. It's got, I don't know how they did this on here, this crankshaft has been modified and it's got this big extra bearing here on the outside on the end. This is the drive end, and that's what gets all the pull on it. It pulls down on that, where normally the shaft would go out and it would turn, and all the torsion, all the stress on it would be just in rotation. But now, because the pulleys are on here and it pulls down with the belts, the forces on it are a little bit different, so they modified it and put this big block on there, and that's a bearing, an extra set of bearings. And then of course on the front you've got the shroud around the front and a big fan in there which blows air out over the engine. And then there's I don't know whether they call it a flywheel or not, kind of a flywheel on that, but it has modified for a rope start, so you can hook a rope on there and pull start it with a rope. Although this engine is a battery start, some of them are rope starts. So then we got the alternator here, of course, and the governor, and then the starter. Keep wanting to call it flywheel, but it's not really a flywheel, it's the ring gear. I'm getting ready to put the ring gear on there, and that fits on here. It's got a keyed shaft here so that it slides on, and then the pulley goes on there. There's a shaft coming out of the ring gear, it's tapered, and the pulley goes on there, and you put the bolts in there and pull the pulley down onto the ring gear, and that tightens everything up. So this ring gear goes on there like that, and I'd measured that before, and we got to tap this on there now. I'd measured it before, and it was 11/16 I think out from this flange. Well, I still got quite a ways to go. I'm 7/8 out there now. God darn it. I got that ring gear on there. I was having trouble getting it on there because that key in the keyway there slid with the ring gear until it went up, and there's the keyway that's machined into this shaft, this main shaft, is tapered up, it's rounded, and that key went in there and slid up in that and bound up this ring gear from going on any farther. So when I took that off, got that key out of there, and then put the ring gear on the shaft, lined up the keyways, and then slid the key in there, and then I got the ring gear adjusted to where it's the right distance out away from the face of this. Actually what I did was I measured from the face of this flange here where it bolts up to the transaxle, and it was 11/16 before. I've got it sitting out to where it's almost exactly the same place. So that's on the shaft, and now we'll put the pulley on there. The pulley slides on in this tapered shaft here and then squeezes it down until it's tight on that main shaft. And of course the keyway keeps it from spinning, but there's threaded holes here in this flange here. This ring gear is welded onto. The bolts go through pulley into this and then pull that pulley on there, and the taper then tightens that up. I had taken these up to the basement after I painted them, and I put them on the lathe and cleaned out the bore in this pulley and this shaft, polished it up, got all the paint off of it and everything, and polished them up. So they're ready to go on there now. Coated these with corrosion block and so I just wiped all that off of there, got it clean. I can line these bolts up with those threaded holes there and pull that thing on there. Go around these evenly. Uh-oh. God damn it. That's not supposed to happen. Alright, well, we gotta start over again now. Well, to get this thing off, there's holes in this pulley that are threaded on the back side, and you just put the bolts in them and tighten down on them, and they come out the other side and actually push on that. And I suppose I busted that damn thing off there too. God darn it. How in the heck did that happen? Certainly aren't very strong 8th grade bolts. Well, crap. That didn't work very well at all. Okay. Alright, so that didn't work either way. I've got to pull that off of there, and my pulley didn't work. Bolts didn't work, so now we got to do it a different way. Have to be careful with these pulleys so you don't break the flanges on here. So we'll put this bearing splitter here, this puller, in here, and that pulls on the thickest part of the pulley back here. There it goes. Okay. Did come, no, it broke. God damn it. I was afraid of that. That broke the pulley. Okay, well, we're out of business now. Okay. Well, now you know how not to do it. Fortunately, the bolt that broke off far enough out that I can get on it with probably vice grips or something and turn it out. Yeah, that's just in there, finger tight. Good. Okay, so I don't have to take this ring gear off of there. Alright, well, that's the good news, such as it is. Okay, there's the bad news. I even wound up cracking this other flange right here. So, a new pulley it is. I didn't think I was putting that much torque on those bolts, but I must have been. I was just using that little 3/8 inch drive ratchet and holding on to it, choked up. I didn't think I was tightening it up that tight, but I must have. I got it on more than tight enough. I'm going to leave that out a little bit till that cools off so it doesn't get stuck on there again. So anyway, that's a good example of how not to do it. I'm going to spray this ring gear, this shaft down with some heavy duty CRC corrosion inhibitor again. This is pretty much the same stuff as that Alcatone in the can. It just goes on thinner. So it's going to be a while before I get the part for that. So I'm just going to go ahead and spray that all down. Keep it from flash rusting while we're waiting for the parts. Yeah, I can go ahead and put the pulley on the, I don't know. Yeah, I can do that because that pulley lines up with this pulley that's onto this. So I can put the pulley on the governor, and I can hook the carburetor up and run the wires and stuff. I can go ahead and finish putting this back together, get all that stuff done so that when I get the valve adjustment screws, studs, I can put those in and get the valves adjusted, and then when I get this pulley I can put it on and it'll be ready to go.